Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Good evening, friends, and welcome to this December 11 edition, 2014 edition of Nightcast. Missed last night because of major equipment problems. I actually bought double the memory for our encoder, installed it, and our outside consultant told us, hey, you needed to increase your power supply at the same time because without it, you were short on voltage. And a whole bunch of things went wacko. And our backup machine, I was just loading on a new version, updating the software it has to use, and that turned into a major 12, 14-hour deal. Anyway, we're back tonight, but we're operating on some different equipment. It's actually our backup equipment, and hopefully, friends, you will not be hearing the usual occasional audio stuttering that we've been having a problem with for the past couple of weeks. And we're getting more frames. We're not dropping frames as badly. And what is that telling me over there? Okay, I understand what you're saying. I need to turn off something so it won't be making noise. I'll just silent that. Friends, our opening story tonight, we're actually doing last night's news. And tomorrow morning, I'll do tonight's news and catch us up. And then by Sunday night, we'll be back to base one, where we usually are. The opening story for tonight, though, friends, comes out of France, where...
Back in France.
Yes, that's what I said, France, or France, as you might say it. Where France's last remaining hostage, Serge Lazarevic, arrived home from Mali to a welcome from family members and French President Francois Hollande. Serge Lazarevic had been held captive by al-Qaeda militants in North Africa since 2011. No details have been given about how his release was secured. Ben Bland has the report.
And finally free. For the past 3 years, Serge Lazarevic has been held captive by the North African arm of al-Qaeda.
Being hostage is a complex affair. It's not simple, but life is beautiful. Now I'm free. I didn't know what freedom meant, and I forgot what being free felt like.
When he landed at the military base near Paris, President Hollande was there to greet him. The last French hostage, he proudly declared, has now been released.
Since I came to office as President of the Republic 2.5 years ago, I made it my objective to secure the release of all the hostages. Unfortunately, some were killed, but you are here amongst us. This is a joy for the French people because there is not a single French hostage held captive anywhere in the world now.
On his journey home, Mr. Lazarevic travelled via Niger and met the country's president, who's understood to have helped secure his freedom. Mr. Lazarevic is said to be in relatively good health, despite his long period in captivity. He was kidnapped in northern Mali in 2011. Last month, he appeared in this al-Qaeda video in which he pleaded with the French president to help free him. In Parliament on Tuesday, the Prime Minister reacted as news of his imminent release reached the capital.
In the name of the government, I welcome the release of our compatriot, Serge Lazarevic, to affirm with strength France doesn't abandon and will never abandon its citizens.
As yet, no details have been given about how exactly the release of Mr. Lazarevic was secured. Ben Bland, BBC News.
Thank you, Ben. Tensions are running high after the death of Ziad Abu Ain, reports Kevin Connolly. A Palestinian minister has died after a confrontation with Israeli troops at a protest in the West Bank. Palestinian medics told the BBC Ziad Abu Ain had died from complications related to tear gas exposure. But several witnesses said the minister had been hit and shoved by soldiers. And later in the report, friends, you'll hear how he actually had a pre-health condition. You'll also hear how he had been sentenced to death for killing 2 teenagers some years ago, and then the death sentence was converted to a life in prison sentence, and then as part of a prisoner swap in exchange for 3 Israeli soldiers, he was released and let go. And because he's a tremendous troublemaker for Israel, it's too bad for Israel and his own good and his people's good, really, when you come down to it. When God says you mess with Israel, you're messing against your Creator. But I'm going to give you this story tonight, friends, in spite of the emotions it turns between people, because it's in the news, and I want you to be aware of what the news is saying regarding this. One man said that Ein had been hit in the chest by a tear gas canister fired by the Israelis. Israel's defense minister Moshe Yaalon expressed regret for Mr. Ein's death. They're calling him the minister's death in a statement. The Israeli military, IDF, said it was investigating the incidents surrounding Mr. Ein's death. And friends, the caption on this next photograph says, it shows Ziad Abu Ein left being grabbed by an Israeli soldier at the protest. That's one of the big video clips that's being circulated with this news story. And the next video, the caption for this, or not, the next photograph, the caption for this photograph reads, Palestinians gathered outside the hospital at Ramallah where Mr. Abu Ein's body was brought. Israeli and Jordanian experts would attend a post-mortem examination, the IDF said. It has also prepared setting up a joint team with the Palestinians to investigate Mr. Abu Ein's death. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon called for an investigation into the death and urged all sides to exercise maximum restraint and avoid escalation. Actually, that's not a bad encouragement, to avoid any escalation over it. Although following the incident, dozens of Palestinians reportedly gathered at the scene near the village, setting fire to tires and throwing stones at security forces. And then the caption with this photograph, friends, goes, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas led prayers at a PLO meeting called following Ziad Abu Ein's death. The Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas held a Palestinian Liberation Organization, PLO, meeting in Ramallah following news of the death of Mr. Ein, whom he called a martyr. Again, friends, I'm just going to remind you, in spite of the fact they want to elevate this man like a hero and a martyr, the man was guilty of hatefully killing 2 Israeli teenagers some years ago, and was sentenced to death over it and got a reprieve. He got it converted over to a life sentence, and then in a prisoner exchange program, he was freed after having had a death sentence hanging over his head for killing 2 innocent Israeli teenagers. It just shows you the hatred that the descendants of Ishmael have for the descendants of Isaac, which is what the Israelis are. Isaac had 2 sons, Jacob and Esau, and Jacob, who was given the promise, Esau sold his birthright over a bowl of lentil soup. Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel, had 12 sons, one of whom was Judah, who's mostly occupying Israel, maybe some of Benjamin, some of Levi, and otherwise has been scattered for a long time around the world. That's the tribe of Judah, the Jews I'm speaking of. And he had 11 other sons. And Ishmael had many sons who are the descendants who are called the Palestinians today, for the most part. Mr. Abu Ein, a minister without portfolio, the news story says, was among dozens of foreign and Palestinian activists taking part in a protest against land confiscations. They, as they look at it, they had planned to plant olive tree saplings on a patch of land near the Jewish settlement of Shiloh, which Palestinians believe had been earmarked for annexation by Israel. In the course of the protest, they came into confrontation with a group of about 15 soldiers. Leading Palestinian activist Mahmoud Alau, who was also at the protest, told the Associated Press, the AP news agency, that the soldiers had fired tear gas and had beaten some of the activists with rifle butts. At one point, Mr. Abu Ein was hit by a tear gas canister, Mr. Alul said. And friends, we do have audio that's being circulated by the news that was recorded just before Mr. Ein collapsed. A Reuters photographer said he had seen Mr. Abu Ein being struck by a hand on the neck during an altercation with two soldiers. An AFP news agency photographer said the minister had been hit in the chest. Protesters had planned to plant olive trees, saplings, on a patch of land they fear would be annexed by Israel. That's the caption for this photograph. But as they approached the land, the protesters were, protesters were stopped by a group of Israel soldiers. Photos of the incident showed Mr. Abu Ein lying unconscious before he was taken away in an ambulance. He died before reaching hospital in the nearby city of Ramallah. There are reports he had a health condition that may have contributed to his death. Let me read that part to you again, friends. There are reports that Mr. Ein had a health condition that may have contributed to his death. The BBC's Kevin Connolly in Jerusalem says Palestinians are likely to see the exact cause of death as a secondary issue, and it will serve to sharpen tensions. They'll only see it as a secondary issue. Condemning the brutal assault on Mr. Abu Ein, Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas promised to take unspecified measures and declared 3 days of mourning. I wonder, did they stop to go back and say, look, we should also be mourning for those 2 Israeli teenagers that Mr. Ein killed? And yet his life was spared after having had a death sentence put over him. A Palestinian official told AFP that the session discussed the suspension of security cooperation with Israel. I mean, what good was that doing anyway, friends, But the decision on whether to take action was deferred until Friday. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, of course, gets in on the act. He is to meet Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Italy on Sunday after the end of the week to discuss recent developments and security issues in Israel and the Palestinian territories, the State Department announced. Mr. Abu Ein once received, here's that part of the story I was telling you about earlier, friends. Mr. Abu Ein once received the death sentence commuted to life imprisonment from a court in Israel for a 1979 bombing that killed 2 Israeli teenagers. He was released in 1985 as part of a prisoner exchange that saw the release of 3 Israeli soldiers captured in Lebanon. All right, friends, that, as of last night, that's what I felt was the most important story going there. Okay. I'm operating on a new system. I've got that audio I want to play for you. I'll play for you now. I'm operating on a new system, and we don't have all of our camera shots brought over yet, so some of the transition shots I would usually do in between the videos I'm not able to do tonight, but hopefully by tomorrow morning I'll have that fixed. I believe we have that audio ready, and I've got no picture with it, but we'll just play that audio of Mr. Abu Ein speaking just shortly before he died.
They are assaulting us. This is the terrorism of the occupation. This is a terrorist army, practices terrorism against the Palestinian people. We came to our Palestinian land to plant olive trees, and they are attacking us for the first moment. We came to our Palestinian land to plant olive trees, and they are attacking us from the first moment. Nobody threw a stone and nobody fought back. And this is the terrorist occupation army practicing suppression and terrorism against the Palestinian people.
Okay, friends. So there you are. That's Mr. Ein. That was what Mr. Ein said and spoke shortly before he died. But a reminder, he had that death sentence over him for a bombing in 1979 that killed 2 teenagers. And Basically, he's what any mayor of any city would, hair would stand up anytime they see a character like that coming into their town, knowing he's only coming, he's pretending a pretense of peace, and yet he's coming to stir up trouble. And to put any potential for a peace process, he just put it at a further ebb. Because they're claiming land that Israel was able to take in a war that Israel did not initiate. And this is not a recent problem. This goes back 3,500 years to the time of Abraham and Sarah and the Egyptian handmaid Hagar, when Sarah was unable to bear a child, and God had told her that her and Abraham would have offspring galore. And yet she thought, well, we need to help it out, so take my handmaid Hagar here, and she'll bear the child on my knees, and it'll be considered our child, Abraham and Sarah. But it didn't work out that way. Hagar started to flaunt her son and showed animosity toward towards Sarah, and God told Abraham to listen to your wife, and his wife wanted Hagar out, and so that's the beginning of that. And God had already decided that it would be Abraham and Sarah's offspring who would be given the promises of a great multitude of people, of grace, of race and grace, that the spiritual promises would also come by way through Abraham and his seed, from whom Christ was born. And it stirred up a lot of animosity on Ishmael's part and his offspring and his descendants. They're like a wild man, and if you don't understand all that, you'll be taken in by their emotional ploys. They'll pretend they're the nicest people in the world, but like former Secretary of State George P. Shultz said about dealing with the Iranians, who are descendants of Ishmael, he said they'll smile at you, send you on your way, and cut your throat. They'll make all these impassioned pleas. Oh, we're victim, this was our land, and and pretend they're getting your emotions. And yet, you give them the land, like give them Gaza, and what do? They lob missiles back at Israel, who just graciously handed the land over to them. They didn't have to do that. And it's worked to the ill of both. But friends, let's go to our next story is out of the UK, and a parliament meeting they just had where they discussed a lot of things that would relate to how the UK will relate or not to being a part of the EU. And whatever laws the UK passes, those laws have to gel with the laws the EU passes, because the EU is the greater thing in political terms. It's over all the other countries. And so the other countries have to bring their laws in line with what the EU hands down. And from that parliament meeting, I want to give you just a few of the discussions and things that were being said in that meeting a couple of days ago. Political parties were putting together their manifestos for next May's general election. This is a guide now from the BBC to where the UK currently stands on the issues that voters say they care about most. And this is according to pollsters IPSOS Mori. And the caption with this photograph, friends, reads immigration. And as you can see here, it says UK border. And related to immigration, the several different political factions that are within the UK Parliament. One of them is the Conservatives, led by David Cameron, who, related to immigration, they want to make migrants wait 4 years before they can claim certain benefits, such as tax credits, universal credit, or get access to social housing. Cameron wants to stop migrants from claiming child benefits for dependents living outside the UK, and remove those that have failed to find work after 6 months. Mr. Cameron has promised to put reform of EU free movement rules at the heart of his renegotiation of Britain's relationship with the EU. He has many other things in mind in relation to this that were discussed in Parliament, and they are enumerated in yesterday's news. While the English Labour Party in that Parliament meeting, they wanted stronger border controls to tackle illegal immigration with, quote, proper entry and exit checks, while the Liberal Democrats, they reintroduce exit checks at borders so the government can identify people who are overstaying their visa and other things. Then the SNP, they want to allow the devolved government to have control over immigration to Scotland and introduce a Canadian-style earned citizenship system to attract highly skilled immigrants. The Plaid Cymru, they oppose a points-based system. They support the right of asylum seekers to work in Wales while they wait for status decisions to be made. They want to lobby the Westminster government to ensure that they shut detention centers. UKIP wants to introduce an Australian-style points policy and many other details in yesterday's news related to what England and its various political divisions will want with regard to immigration. And that's only one of many topics related to the EU issues, including the EU budget that was just passed. And that relates to the next category, and that's taxes and economy, which was discussed in Parliament with Conservatives wanting to eradicate the deficit by 2018, and they propose a detailed plan for that, while Labour argues get the current budget into surplus and the national debt falling as soon as possible in the next Parliament. And among other things, they want to bring in a mansion tax on properties worth over £2 million to raise £1.2 billion, and they want other taxes that were part of yesterday's news in the UK. Other political divisions have other ideas, and without going into all the details on that, which would literally take hours, I'm going to follow with just a little more highlighting the items the UK plans to argue or negotiate against future EU budgetary measures. But before I summarize the other areas, let me mention the one from the taxes subheading that the leaders of every country put high on their agendas, and that is a crackdown on tax avoidance by multinationals. How does that saying go? There are two things in life you can't escape: death and taxes. Is that it? Well, the next area, friends, is security, defense, and foreign affairs that was discussed in Parliament. And friends, some of these things that were discussed in Parliament really relate to the United States and NATO in an extremely impactful way. That's coming up in the next item. Wait till we get to that. That's going to be the cruncher of this particular news item. But in this regard, related to security, defense, and foreign affairs, Conservatives want to hold a referendum on Britain's membership of the EU by 2017 after negotiating the return of some powers from Brussels. They want to protect foreign aid budget. They want to replace Trident. Labour is pushing for reform of European Union, and they want to prevent Britain from what they called, quote, sleepwalking towards exit. Friends, again, there's more in the details, and cutting ahead to one I should not leave out that was brought up by the Greens. They want a referendum on Britain's EU membership. They want reform of EU to hand powers back to local communities. They want to scrap Britain's nuclear weapons. And get this, they want to take the UK out of NATO unilaterally. And here comes a couple of crunchers you should not miss. They want to end the so-called, quote, special relationship between the UK and the US. And they want to stop the EU-US free trade deal, TTIP. Another area of concern for the UK related to the EU relationship involves this next category that was discussed in the Parliament meeting, and that is jobs. I think, I'm not sure if I get the right, let's see. Yeah, there we go, jobs. Conservatives want to create 3 million apprenticeships to be paid for by benefit cuts. Labour wants to guarantee a job for people who are under 25 years old, unemployed for over a year, and for adults unemployed for more than 2 years. And with all the variant of ideas presented in what each political division thinks government should do with respect to jobs for its citizens, friends, just in that area alone and in all the other things too, you can see why God uses the analogy in the great image of Daniel 2 of the feet and toes being consisting of part iron and partly of clay, miry common clay. Because right within one country, right within the UK, there is such a multitude of ideas. It is a wonder they ever come to agreement on anything at all, except maybe when a crisis or deadline simply forces the issue to swing one way or another from so many ideas. And again, I'm not reading them all, or we'd be here until past midnight tonight for a program that begins normally at 8 p.m. in the Central Time District. And next on the discussion was housing. Conservatives want first-time buyers in England under the age of 40 to be able to buy a house at 20% below the market rate, with 100,000 starter homes to be built for them. Labour is saying build 200,000 houses a year by 2020, including new towns and garden cities. They want to cap rent increases in certain places, and on about housing. And then, friends, the next area of discussion was law and order. The Conservatives saying they wanted banning orders to outlaw groups that incite hatred or cause fear. What they want is extremism disruption orders, EXDOs, to stop, quote, disruptive individuals from speaking in public or holding a position of authority. Now, at first read, that could sound like a law that could work against many politicians now in office. Do you not think it would? You know, the SNP wants to support the European arrest warrant. They want to cooperate with other countries on organized crime and terrorism. And in the next area of benefits and poverty, the Conservatives wanted no increases in benefits for working-age people for 2 years to save £3 billion, and they want to raise the personal allowance, the point at which a person starts paying income tax, to a point where if you work on a minimum wage for 30 hours, you'll pay no income tax. Labor says freeze energy prices until 2017, and the Greens Party backs a citizen's income, a fixed amount to be paid to every individual, whether they are in work or not, to be funded by higher taxes on the better off and green levies. But in the short term, it would increase the minimum wage to £10 by 2020, and much more was discussed in that Parliament meeting, friends, and all of what they want to do. If the UK stays in the EU, all they want to do, everything they pass has to gel with whatever laws are passed by the members of the European Parliament or the EU's administrative heads, which is one way the EU is shaping, and it seems that in the future there may be a lot of turmoil between what the EU wants and what the UK wants. As God puts it in the factions with the makeup of the eventual 10 nations or regions of the EU, they will not get along, just like common miry clay and iron don't mix. You know, those 10 nations, those 10 regions, they won't get along even within a given country, even within the UK. You know, you let these different political divisions and factions have at one another, and, you know, they got all these different ideas. They even within one country, they don't get along. But last night, I read to you at length the bold doings of Germany's Foreign Minister Frank-Walter Steinmeier, who wants Germany to rise to be a world power. And then I want to say last night, I'm really referring to, since we weren't on the air last night, our last program, which would have been Tuesday night, and friends were trying to get our equipment working. The reason we were off the air, I actually bought double memory, but I failed to buy a power supply that would handle that extra memory and crashed everything. And now I got to get that power supply in to get that main unit fixed. We're operating on a backup unit now, and so, you know, out of doing 500 programs in the past year and a half, it's a rare thing that I miss a night. I make a commitment to it, and except for things like equipment that won't get us on the air, you know, I'm there to do this program. And I'm even doing last night's program tonight, and then tomorrow morning I'll do tonight's program and catch us up, and then Sunday night will be... we do take a break during our church's activities, which most of you who watch this program, a lot of you are from our church, and you take the same break. But sometimes, even during the feast, we keep the news going because even when we're in special training for a week, that doesn't mean we should ignore what's going on in the world, especially with the instruction that Jesus Christ gave us in Luke 21, verse 36, to watch the things of... Am I able to put our chart on the screen? I think I can't. I think I'm not able to put it on the screen behind me without just cross-fading to it. I'm not sure I can bring it in to the middle section on a tight shot. No, not with the camera, not with this new setup. We'll have to work that shot in here. But you can see it in the middle. There are some colored bars that represent the seals of Revelation. That first white bar in the middle, that represents the first seal, which is depicted in Revelation as a white horse, which Jesus Christ described in plain language. It's a white horse with a rider having a bow, and Jesus Christ described it as religious deception, false Christ, false religion, false prophets. He said, beware of those who come in my name. He said they'll say that I'm the Christ and they'll preach a message about me, but they won't bring you the message that I'm bringing you about the kingdom of God. They'll bring a message of deception. And he said, watch out for that deception. The second seal is depicted by a red horse, which Jesus Christ described in plain language as war, rumors of war, and world war, nation against nation, kingdom against kingdom. The third seal is depicted by a black horse with a rider with a scale in his hands and described as essentially scarcity of food, and Jesus Christ termed it in a word, famine. The fourth seal is depicted by a pale horse who has a rider named Death, alongside whom rides Hades, hell, the grave, and a horse of much death. Jesus Christ described the activity of the primary activity of this horse in the Greek word that was written up by the gospel writers as loimos, meaning disease epidemics, the plagues of Egypt, pestilence. And Christ also said that between that third seal and the fifth seal, at the same time the fourth seal is rolling, would be seismos, seismic activity, increasing seismic activity. Commotions in the air, such as gale force winds of all kind, commotions on the ground, such as earthquakes and tsunamis and wildfires and floodings and any kind of seismic activity on the ground, and especially those that cause death. And Christ also said that during this time of increased troubles, there would be disturbances and troubled waters. He said that it would be both literal and figuratively. In the figurative sense, mobs and seditions, disturbances, trouble, but not the mega trouble, not the great tribulation of the fifth seal, which is next, the next major event in prophecy to happen. We're seeing these first four seals active now, friends, but this next seal, Christ said you can escape the Great Tribulation, which is going to be the greatest time of trouble since the beginning of the world that there ever has been or ever will be, Christ said in Matthew 24, verses 20, 21, 22. And he said that in Luke 21:36, he said that if you will watch and pray, put your heart into what you see and pray about it, become a part of the day's world news that relate to these first four seals. These first four seals, he was describing them in the earlier part of Luke 21, which is a parallel chapter to Matthew 24, and they also parallel Mark 13. And Mark 13, in verse 8, is the only place that mentions that third element of the fourth seal that in the Greek term, in the Greek language, Christ described as terike, the one meaning disturbances, trouble. And when we see all those things increase, then know that this great tribulation is at the door, right down the street, because we're seeing a greatly increased activity in these four seals. So that's just a quick review of what we try to help you watch for on this program, friends, to help you be aware and help you be watching and praying, as Christ said. And he said in verse 36 of Luke 21, he said, if you will, watch and pray. And he says there's a carrot he holds out, and a promise. He says, do this that you may be accounted worthy to escape. Escape what? He said, escape all these things. And these things that are happening now, they are going to get worse and culminate in the fifth seal, the great tribulation, that you can escape, Christ promises. And we go into more of that type of subject on the weekend, and I play a lot of the recordings of the broadcast, telecast, sermons, Bible studies of Mr. Herbert W. Armstrong, whose many recordings God has preserved so that even though he died in 1986, it's as if he still speaks from the grave, and what he was saying in those recordings are more relevant today than they were at the time he actually spoke them. But let's go back and finish up tonight's the news from last night tonight. On Tuesday night, a German court threw out a case against the Nazi Oradour massacre. Nazi Oradour, friends, let's see. I had some, with my little diversion I just gave you, I actually had some slides I was going to put up on the screen. Let me just, because I need to get those out of the way, let me just flash through those. These 2 feet you see, they are part of the great image that Nebuchadnezzar saw in Daniel 2, that was a dream that King Nebuchadnezzar had. What did I say? And Daniel was able to, God gave Daniel a vision to understand what the king had seen in his dream, and gave Daniel the interpretation so that he could explain it to the king. And it winds up with the bottom of that great image being coming down to today's modern time with 2 feet, part of clay and part of iron. And just common clay, miry common clay mixed with iron. And those two things, they don't mix, they won't hold together. But for 1 hour, they will come together and give their power to a beast, the 7th and final head of the Holy Roman Empire, that will be revived when these 10 nations give their power to one, that the Pope will go over to Frankfurt, Germany, in the Emperor's Hall, and crowned in a coronation ceremony when this Holy Roman Empire is revived. And it will consist of 5 nations or regions from the east and 5 from the west. Those 2 legs of the great image represented the division of Rome into its eastern and western divisions, and that's what you see here, the 2 feet on each side of Rome. There's the overall great image that King Nebuchadnezzar saw in his dream, and as Daniel explained it to him, "Oh, King Nebuchadnezzar, you are the head of gold. Your kingdom is the greatest, and after you, though, will come one a little bit inferior. The breast and arms of silver represent a world-ruling empire that will rule the world, and yet won't be quite the kingdom yours was, O King Nebuchadnezzar." And the belly and brass the belly and thighs of brass represented the next world kingdom, and then those 2 legs represented the Roman kingdom and its 2 divisions. And then the feet again are again spread out over the eastern and western parts of Europe in what was called a Holy Roman Empire. And then that head of gold on that great image is equivalent to the upper left-hand corner, a lion, as that great image was in King Nebuchadnezzar's dream that is recorded in Daniel 2. But then in Daniel 7, it's depicted by 4 beasts, and that first beast that had the head of a lion and 2 wings like an eagle, that again was King Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom, and it was equivalent to that head of gold. The second thing was a beast like a bear. It had the paws like a bear, and that was equivalent to the breast and arms of silver. And then the third one was a leopard that had 4 heads and 4 wings, and that was equivalent to the belly and thighs of brass. And then that fourth dreadful and terrible beast at the bottom right-hand side of this picture was equivalent, to the legs of iron, the Roman Empire with its 2 feet that have the 10 toes on it. And that those 4 beasts are mentioned again in Revelation 13, and they were originally mentioned in Daniel 7 as 4 beasts, but in Revelation 13, where it describes a beast that comes out of the sea, in verse 1, that beast that comes out of the sea has all the elements of those 4 beasts. It has a body like a leopard, but it speaks like a lion, and there's the head of the lion on it. And it has the 4 heads of a leopard. It has the paws like a bear, so there's your bear's head. And then it's a great and terrible beast with strong iron teeth, and that represents those strong legs of iron. So all those elements of the great image of Daniel 2 are also depicted in Daniel 7 and are depicted by this beast from the sea in Revelation 13, verse 1. And then on that head of that beast from Revelation 13, verse 1, the beast out of the sea, that 7th head, it's 4 beasts, but it has 7 heads because the second beast has 4 heads of a leopard. So when you add in the 4 heads of a leopard and the first and third beast, you got 6 heads, and so then when you get to the 4th beast, that's the 7th head, and that 7th head is described in Revelation 13:1 as having 10 horns. The first 3 were plucked up by their roots at the behest of the Pope. The remaining 7 horns are ridden by the woman, which is a religious system, and those remaining 7 horns that are on this beast out of the sea, they relate to the 7 heads of the beast that comes out of the land that is mentioned later in Revelation 13 and verse 11 as another beast. But that other beast is simply an extension of the head, of the seventh head of the four beasts from the beast that comes out of the sea. And they match up. The last seven heads match up, the last seven horns, or last seven remaining horns on that beast out of the sea match up with the seven heads from the beast that comes out of the land. Now, I've gone into this in careful detail in the past, but I'm just hitting the highlights. And that seventh head on that beast that comes out of the land, it has 10 horns. But they're not the same 10 horns as on the beast that comes out of the sea. These 10 horns on the beast that comes out up from the land, those 10 horns are equivalent to the 10 toes of the great image from Daniel 2. And those are the 10 kings that give their power to that seventh and final head of the Holy Roman Empire during our day, during these latter days. All right, so there's a little chart on that. I'm sorry I'm rushing through it so much. The main thing we pay attention to during Nightcast are these four seals that are going to lead, that are depicted by four horses in Revelation, that are going to lead up to the fifth seal, the Great Tribulation that, dear friends, you want to avoid at all cost if you can. And God promises you in Luke 21, verse 36, that if you will watch these things and pray always, that you may be accounted worthy to escape. He holds that carrot out. You do these things, that you may be accounted worthy to escape. It's a promise he gives us. And if we do our part, you can count on God doing his part. But you got to really put your heart into it. You got to care about what you see. And I'm going to give you a couple more stories before we close up that hopefully will help us to do that. I was starting to mention a moment ago that this story from Tuesday's news, this opening photograph for this story, has a caption that reads, "The villagers were locked into the church before grenades were thrown into the building, and it was set alight." Now, that story goes along with the introduction here that says, "Nazi Oradour massacre, German court throws out case." The case related to the villagers who were locked into the church before grenades were thrown into the building, and it was set alight. A court in the German city of Cologne has said there is not enough evidence to try an 89-year-old man accused over an infamous Nazi massacre of civilians in France. SS troops murdered 642 people in the central village of Oradour-sur-Glane on June 10, 1944. Werner C. did not deny being in the village, but said he had no direct involvement in the murders. Prosecutors accused him of shooting 25 people and helping to murder many more. The caption under this photograph that's part of this story, friends, reads, "The men were separated from the women. The men were separated from the women and children before the massacre began." Some 450 women and children were herded into a church in the village. Then grenades were thrown into the building, and it was set alight. The men were shot before being locked in a barn, which was also set on fire. The ruins of the village had been left as they were in 1944 as a permanent memorial to those who died. The suspect, whose full name was not given in court under German privacy laws, was charged by prosecutors in Dortmund in January after files of 6 soldiers who were still alive were uncovered in the archives of the Stasi secret police in the former East Germany. 20 soldiers were convicted for their part in the murders in the 1950s, but all were subsequently freed. And then the caption that goes with this photograph, friends, Germany's President Gauck, on the right, visited the village last year with President Hollande and survivor Robert Hebris. Werner C. had been, and by the way, the survivor is in the middle and over on the far right side. I think maybe you can tell that's, or actually on the left side of this picture, he's on the right side of the victim, but on the left side of the picture is French President Hollande. And then that's the, on the other side, as I just mentioned, that's the German President Gauck. On the right side of your picture, on the left side of the man. Werner C. had been a member of an SS mechanized infantry regiment known as the Führer, according to prosecutors, and had been listed as a machine gunner. However, the court said a trial would only be able to establish that he was in the area during the massacre and rejected the list as incomplete. Quote, this mere presence is not enough to prove accessory to murder without the proof of other circumstances, end quote, the court said. The Dortmund prosecutors have a week in which to appeal against the decision. A clear motive for the massacre of French civilians was never fully established, although there were suggestions that it was a reprisal for the kidnap of a German officer. In an interview earlier this year, the suspect claimed he had saved two women, urging them to head for a nearby forest. Oradour has served as a symbol of reconciliation in recent years between Germany and France. Last year, German President Joachim Gauck stood hand in hand in the village with President Francois Hollande and an 88-year-old survivor, Robert Hebrus, and that relates to this photograph right here, where you see the two with Robert Hebrus, friends, the two presidents of Germany and of France, with Robert Hebrus, the survivor from World War II. And friends, I promised you on Tuesday night that I would tell you about the EU reaching a deal on the 2015 budget and their overdue bills. And the caption for this photograph, for this news story, reads, MEPs, members of the European Parliament, have more power than previously to shape the EU budget. In other words, if I'm reading between the lines correctly, the EU is becoming less and less democratic, or it's becoming less and less of the people and for the people or by the people. It's going to be more and more autocratic or administrative in its governing methodology or methods. We, the MEP, will tell you how it's going to be, is what the position they take is. It reminds me of last night's story about, or Tuesday night's, last program story about German Foreign Minister Frank-Walter Steinmeier telling the heads of Germany's big business to forget the people of the country of Germany who want little or nothing to do with war anymore. And, as Frank-Walter Steinmeier said it and said, we will set the agenda for economic policy, political policy, and military policy, which we will raise up to make Germany's role be that of the most major world power in existence, ruling the world and having a military that makes that of the United States pale into insignificance, makes the United States have to subjugate itself to us as the mighty leaders of Germany. And friends, that's reading between the lines of what he boldly said 2 days ago. Frank-Walter Steinmeier, before the big business leaders of Germany, boldly speaking out. Hey, where is NASA when you need them? The NSA, when you need them. Anybody feeding this to our government leaders who care? Does anybody care that Germany is attempting once again? They're setting language for reviving World War III. We're going to rule over you with whatever it takes, economically, politically, and militarily. The very three things Mr. Herbert W. Armstrong told us to be watching for that would indicate that the EU is coming together in a confederation of something like a United States of Europe that will be able to give power to one, which the Bible calls a beast, which I've mentioned throughout the program tonight, will be the seventh and final head of the Holy Roman Empire. Now, 2 days ago in that talk, Steinmeier, now he's dreaming of World War III, and for him it's not a dream he considers to be a nightmare, just a Steinmeier. And Ken, is it as if I'm laughing a little on that one, so but without actually laughing, because some serious times are coming. Negotiators from the European Parliament and EU governments have reached a deal on the EU's 2015 budget and amendments to the 2014 budget. Spending in 2015 has been set at 141.2 billion euros. That'd be the equivalent of 111.2 billion pounds, or $173.5 billion, amid pressure to scale it back. National budgets have been cut across Europe to reduce huge deficits. A $3 billion top-up payment was agreed for 2014 to help clear EU bills bringing the final figure to 139 billion euros. The UK's total contribution to the current budget is a little over 15 billion euros. That's 11% of the total. The deal is 11% of the total budget being carried by Joseph's brother, one of two Joseph's sons, the half-tribe of Ephraim, a brother of Manasseh, the United States. And yet the UK talks of, let's get out of NATO completely, let's cut the relation with the U.S., let's cut the U.S.-EU trade deal, get it out of the picture, a U.S.-UK trade deal, the TTIP. This European budget deal is expected to be signed off next week. The MEPs, which stands for the members of the European Parliament, they have asked the European Commission to find a way for the EU to pay off other outstanding bills amounting to more than 25 billion euros. They include some funding for laboratories, student grants, and apprenticeships. Our brother Ruben, a French MEP, Jean Arthus, said, gave us those facts. Farm subsidies and support for the EU's least developed regions are the biggest spending areas in the 28-nation bloc. A separate source of friction in the EU budget negotiations is an extra $2.1 billion euros that the UK has been asked to contribute because of the way new accounting rules affected the calculation of national contributions. The UK government has refused to pay. Reflecting concern about excessive spending, leaders agreed last year to cut the long-term EU budget for 2014 to 2020 by about 3%. The 2015 budget, friends, this is important because as we watch the coming together of the EU, they're creating a budget and living by it or not, and how it affects who becomes part of the EU just spins all around this story. The 2015 budget includes $8 billion to launch a $315 billion investment plan announced by Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker. Most of that 315 billion euros will be in the form of loan guarantees or private investment. An EU task force on investment has identified 2,000 potential projects worth a massive 1.3 billion euros, including improvements to Europe's infrastructure in areas such as transport, green energy, schools, and flood defenses. The Commission says more than 500 billion euros worth of projects could be launched over the next 3 years, and some could be funded by Mr. Juncker's scheme. I'm reading that line to you straight out of the news story, friends, from yesterday on this, or from the day before yesterday on this EU 2015 budget. The investment proposals were set out in a report on Tuesday, compiled by experts from the Commission, European Investment Bank, EIB, European Investment Bank, and national bodies. Infrastructure investment across Europe is seen as a way to create much-needed jobs, boost investor confidence, and avoid economic stagnation, especially in the ailing Eurozone. Commission Vice President said there has been a severe disconnect between the available investment and credible projects on the ground. We are now taking, quote, we are now taking a big step to restore investor confidence and connect the two. The report will be discussed by EU leaders at a Brussels summit on December 18 and 19. And with today being December 11, actually, that's a week from, it'll begin a week from today. So that'll be next Thursday and next Friday of next week. Friend, let's end with something kind of light. I did an extended report tonight. We're kind of been going that way. I've had encouragement from many of you to give us all the news, Steve, that relates. We'll stick with you for an hour. Don't worry about it. We'll be, give it to us. And so let me just check my camera angle there and get that better so I don't cut out of the picture. For this next story, friends, relate to something nice and light. The royal couple and their U.S. trip with St. Andrew's anniversary gala yesterday, a gala in New York to mark the 600th anniversary of the Scottish University where the royal couple first met, has drawn close to has drawn a close to the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge's visit to the United States. The 3-day visit is the last the couple will make together before they have their second baby. Nicholas Witchell has this report.
The following report contains flash photography.
Going out with a flourish, William and Catherine arrived for the final event of their visit, a gala dinner at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, in aid of St. Andrews University, where they met as students. A glittering evening, tapping into the wealth of New York, with tickets costing up to $10,000. For William, it was a moment to reminisce about his student days.
But it's often said by the undergraduates of St. Andrews that you leave the university in either one of two states, either married or an alcoholic. Well, fortunately for Catherine and me, we ended up married.
It's been a flying visit to New York, little more than 48 hours from their arrival on Sunday evening to their departure for home. They've done just 10 events in these 2 days. In truth, New Yorkers have barely had a chance to glimpse them. These visits are consumed almost entirely through the mass media, and that's been overwhelmingly positive. For Catherine, there won't be any more foreign visits like this until after the birth of their baby in April. William, though, is due to make what will be an important visit to China at the end of February. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News, New York.
And friends, that's it for this, what if, in essence is a Wednesday night report that I'm doing on Thursday night because our equipment knocked us off the air last night. I've got a story that I'm going to do for you in our next in our next program that comes from news from well, what day was that this week? That comes from the 10th of December, so that comes from news from yesterday out of France related to laws having to do with businesses that can work on Sunday or not. I'll have that story for you tomorrow. So that one would relate to the first seal, the white horse, related to religion and religious deceptions. And friends, we went a little over an hour. Let me sign off from here tonight from our new equipment, and we got us back on the air, and we'll keep everybody up to date. Thanks for joining me, God willing, and the creek don't rise. I'll be back tomorrow morning and get it on to the archives with the report from Thursday for this week. And then we'll be off until Sunday night, where we don't do a program on Friday or Saturday night. So thanks for joining me tonight. Until next time, friends, this is your host, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth, saying so long and good night, friends.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on cogtv.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the cogtv.org video archive.